name is Houskeeper. I work with Todd Myers, our director for Center for the Environment. I'm a policy analyst, and we've been extremely busy thus far in 2010 on environmental issues. And I'd like to share with you some of the activities that we've been involved with, some of the legislation that we monitored and worked with legislators on, and then what we've got going on as we move forward in the rest of 2010. So to start off 2010, Greg talked about our efforts reaching out to more people across the state of Washington. One of the first things that we did in 2010 was we had an opportunity to partner up with the Pasco Chamber of Commerce and put together a policy forum in eastern Washington on agricultural issues. They came to us recognizing the work that we've done on various subjects such as biofuels, and the carbon cap and trade issues, carbon offsets, and they asked us to come over and share with the agricultural community our thoughts and policy perspectives on those issues. So that's one example of how we've been able to reach out and work with people across the state. In addition, during the legislative session, we held our own environmental policy forum or briefing with the legislature and their staff. And there we were able to present to them and unveil our 2010 recommendations for environmental stewardship. Among those, we talk about repealing the costly and ineffective green building mandates that were adopted in 2005 in Olympia. And we also talked about ensuring that the state is receiving the carbon emission reductions that it pays for. And as I talk today, you'll notice a little bit of a theme that we are trying to develop in the Center for the Environment about accountability and making sure that we're actually getting what we pay for when it comes to the environment. So let me talk about a couple of things that happened during the legislative session. I'll first talk about some challenges that we had. The number one challenge I'll talk about was a bond bill that's going to be on the ballot in November. Representative Hans Dunshee proposed a bond measure that would seek voter approval to issue general obligation bonds. And that proposal basically says that the state can offer $500 million in general obligation bonds. It'll push the state over its capacity to offer bonds, but the legislature decided to adopt that anyways. One of the claims that we focused on as we wrote about the subject and looked into it and analyzed it was one of the claims that was coming from the proposal was that this was a bill that would create jobs, that it would create thousands of jobs. In fact, Representative Hans Dunshee, the chair of the committee, Capital Budget Committee, said that this bill would create, as it passed the legislature, 30,000 jobs across the state. And so we looked at that, and if you do the math, if you do $500 million in general obligation bonds, and you divide it by the 30,000 jobs that are promised, that's only $17,000 approximately per job that is going to be created. And we haven't even talked about the materials that will be used on the construction projects. So we're skeptical about the promises that are being made on such large measures like that. As we move forward and get closer to the election, Todd and I will be taking a closer look at the bond measure and continue to do some analysis work and releasing further studies on that. Another challenge that was out there was the Department of Commerce was working with the legislature. They wanted to update the state's energy policy. In so doing, the bill was written in such a way that the Department of Commerce would not have to check back with the legislature as they established the goals for the state when it came to energy policy. We worked with legislators and pointed out some policy perspectives that could be used to strengthen those bills. And in the end, the legislature modified the bills to the energy bill to establish a stakeholder process that was not present in the original bill. Unfortunately, the governor repealed that public process element of the bill. She vetoed it out. So we're working with the Department of Commerce to ensure that there will be a public process and pointing out the policy reasons of why it would be important to have stakeholder input. However, we did have some successes in Olympia. I want to talk about a couple of them quickly. Many of you may have heard of the hazardous substance tax that was being debated in Olympia. There was a proposal to raise hundreds of millions of dollars for the purpose of protecting the environment. Stormwater is one of the largest contributors to degrading the Puget Sound. There's studies that are out on that. And so proponents were seeking additional funding sources. The problem is the state already contributes over $800 million in the current biennium that we're in to deal with stormwater issues. But what the legislature has chosen to do in the past is they've stolen some of that money. They stole over $100 million last year to go towards other things in the general fund to fund education or health care from the dedicated sources that were steal even more money from the hazardous substance tax and not actually put that money towards cleaning up the Puget Sound. So we worked on that. We put together a legislative memo on that and shared our perspectives with legislators, and that did not move forward. And finally, the last success that I'll talk about was the governor, after last session, the legislature failed to act on cap and trade policies. They didn't advance the governor's cap and trade policies that were proposed. So after the session ended, the governor used her executive authority to issue an executive order that mandated that her state agencies went forward and worked on establishing the tools so that cap and trade could be implemented at a later date. And so we asked the question, well, what is if her agencies are working on something that the legislature didn't ask them to do, the legislature specifically chose not to adopt cap and trade, we want to know what are they not doing. And what we found out was that it cost the state approximately $1.6 million to fulfill the governor's executive order to move forward on pursuing certain measures of cap and trade. And in the meantime, we asked them, well, what work did you not do? Because they said, we're just going to do it in current funding. We don't need additional funding. We'll just do it under current funding by reorganizing what we're doing. And some of the things that they failed to do was act on small business owners' permits for clean air or clean water. So instead of doing what they should have been doing by acting on small business owners' permits, they were instead focusing on the governor's executive order. So we put together a legislative memo on that as well. Again, the overall theme for what we're doing with Center for Environment is we're asking legislators, lawmakers to be accountable and to prioritize what they're doing. We've written several pieces. One of the two pieces I want to highlight that we did is the first one was 5 years of environmental policy and are we making a difference? Every year the legislature, the Senate Democrats put out a list of things that they've accomplished in the environmental realm of policy making. And we went through and we looked at those going back 5 years and we said, what have they accomplished? Are they making any advancements? And just to give you an idea of what's happening, our overall score that we gave them on environmental effectiveness over the last 5 years is a -1. We graded on a scale from -5 to +5. And we looked at things like green schools, banning flame retardant compounds, requiring schools to buy locally, Washington state climate policy, building weatherization, climate change, so on and so forth. And we went back and we looked at the implementation, and the number one thing that we found in all these programs is nobody has gone back and looked at these policies to see what's happening. And so we think that's one of the first things we should do is stop and look at what's going on. The last thing that I'll touch on is we also put together a policy brief on how government officials are increasing home prices. A lot of times we don't realize how much the policies that are being implemented ends up costing us down the road because they come to us in different forms like permit fees and other costs that are not easily seen by the consumer or the business community. And just one key finding from that report says government policies added as much as 28% or $67,000 to the cost of a typical single-family home in the Olympia area. In Vancouver, it added $54,000 or 25% of the cost. In Spokane, about $38,000 or 21% of the cost. So you can see that government action or government policies have a direct impact on what's going on. Moving forward, we're going to continue to look at the bonds referendum that is going to be on the ballot. And we have our annual CEP conference and luncheon that will be on Thursday, July 29th. We're going to be talking, we have our keynote speaker is Professor Roger Hilke Jr., and his research focuses on intersection of science and technology in decision making. And our conference topics will discuss